Can we do that again? I didn't get it. Sharon, start again.
No, Lauren can listen.
Just
to
give the intro one more time.
Okay, Rabbi Alan Haber grew up with Deborah Brown in Livingston and has offered to start this year today in honor of her memory. And at her, we should have another family function.
It's actually at least the second time that I've had the, opportunity to say a Dvar Torah sort of in Debbie's honor at a major life event. The first one was a much happier occasion. I spoke to her Shabbat Bracha when she and Todd got married. It's Chodesh Nisan, I don't say Espedim either, so I'll try to just say a Dvar Torah. As Sharon said, Lilu Nishmata, but something that I hope will in some way relate to her life and to the feelings I'm sure we all have. Everyone was obviously very shocked and dismayed, and hopefully we'll be able to in some way use the opportunity to learn. I'll say some few words, and Yaakov will say we decided to do two short, like mini shiur or lengthy Dvar Torah, however you want to call it. I, as someone who knew Debbie literally from childhood, we grew up together, and our families were still are close friends. We were both, I think, founding members of Livingston NCSY chapter, and our advisor, Lisa, is here as well. We were there before Lisa in the very early days. The Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim, which we quote at Haggadah, quotes Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel היה אומר, כל שלא אמר שלושה דברים אלו בפסח לא יצא ידי חובתו, ואלוהים פסח מצה maror. And from that, we have a halacha which we fulfill by quoting that Mishnah and the elaboration on it, that one of the requirements of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim is that we are obligated to discuss and explain the three central mitzvot achila, only two of which up until now we've been able to observe, and the third, B'mheira V'imenu, maybe even this year. But even if we don't fulfill it practically, we have to discuss the mitzvot, these three mitzvot achila, the Korban Pesach and Matzah and Maror. And then there's a small, short text in the Haggadah that we're all familiar with that explains the very, very basic meaning of each of these three mitzvot. As we know, the Korban Pesach is meant to recall the Korban Pesach that was born in Mitzrayim, through which we gained the redemption from Mitzrayim, and Matzah because the dough didn't have time to rise, and the Maror to remember the bitterness of our lives in Egypt. I want to very briefly just take each one of these three and try to give a slightly more elaborate, somewhere half between Pshat and Jerash explanation of perhaps what the symbolism might be. So first the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, the Torah says you have to slaughter the animal. That I'm talking about the first Korban Pesach. You have to slaughter the animal and place the blood on the doorpost. And that's meant to be some sort of a symbol. And the Pasuk says, "V'ra'iti et hadam u'fasachti aleichem." Right? God will, "Avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim." I'm going to pass through Egypt, killing all of the firstborns. And when I see the houses with the blood on the door, so I'll know to skip over those houses as if some sort of a secret code or something of that nature. That raises a bit of a theological question. God obviously doesn't need such a symbol. But it says, I'll see the blood, and that's how and because of that, I'll pass over you. The rabbis in the Midrash note that the pasuk immediately prior to that phrase says, "V'haya hadam lachem leot, v'ra'iti et hadam ufasachti alechem." Blood, and it should say, if it's really just some kind of code, it should say, "V'haya hadam li leot," right? That God should say, "That'll be my sign, and I'll know who to skip over." It doesn't say that. It says, "V'haya hadam lachem leot." And in fact, the rabbis in the Midrash, I believe Rashi may even quote it on the pasuk there, I don't recall, but derived from that the blood was actually placed on the inside of the door. Couldn't even necessarily see it from the outside, because the blood is not to show anyone on the outside. It's certainly not for God to see. It's for yourself to see. And then, "V'ra'iti et hadam," when I see what you have seen, then ufasachti alechem, then I can pass over it. And perhaps the symbolism of that, the Ramban and a number of other commentaries draw attention to the fact that the said, the lamb that was slaughtered in Mitzrayim was actually a deity that was worshipped by the Egyptians. And therefore, by slaughtering that animal, you're actually rejecting the entire culture in which you had lived until that point. And that's not a simple thing to do, to essentially reject the fundamental principle of the entire culture on which your entire life and upbringing had been based. And that's what was necessary. Before the physical redemption from Egypt, you have to redeem yourself by liberating yourself from the culture of what Mitzrayim represented. So the Pasuk says, slaughter that animal, place the blood on the door. Vayadam lachem la'ot. When you see that you have slaughtered the God of the Egyptians, then ufasachti v'ra'iti et adam ufasachti alechem. Then I can do that. And that's a powerful idea. That sometimes, and thank God we don't live in ancient Egypt, and I don't know that we need to reject all aspects. I don't think we need to reject all aspects of the culture that surrounds us, but there certainly are aspects of the culture in which we are immersed that need to be rejected. And that's one central component of Geula, is v'ra'iti et adam ufasachti alechem, or b'haya adam lachem la'ot. Put that aside for a minute, let's talk about matzah. There are many, many symbolisms you can speak about with matzah. I'll just share one idea which is entirely my own. I've never seen anyone else say it, and maybe it's wrong, but I'll share it anyway. You'll tell me what you think. There's something very strange about matzah. As we know, there are 5 types of grain that can become chametz. Wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. And nothing else can become chametz. Even though as Ashkenazim we don't eat what's called kidney, or right? We don't eat rice and corn and things like that, but they're not chametz, they can't become chametz, we're already going to have to remove them from our homes. And we all know very, very well, I'm impressed even that you have cookies on the table here, a lot of people by now are even nervous to have chametz around their homes. On Pesach we have this allergic reaction, we need to stay far, 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 far away from chametz. What's bizarre about matzah, which is meant to be the antithesis of chametz, is that matzah can be baked from exactly 5 different ingredients, 5 types of flour, and it's exactly the 5 types of flour that can become chametz. The first time I ever baked matzah shmura l'mahadrin that we were going to use at the Seder, right? And you go to the factory and you mix it in, and you have to roll everything, whatever, and then there's a guy with some kind of stopwatch or something, and they ring a bell and everything freezes. And then before the next batch, you have to scrub everything down because there's chametz, gomer, dorais all over everything. I said to my wife, what would you do if I would come home and take a piece of bread and slap it down there on the Seder plate? She said, I'd kill you, right? And she said, you tell me that halakhically it's not a problem, and it's cold, we just have to wash it off, but I would kill you anyway. But the matzah that we eat at the Seder was baked on equipment that had exactly that, because it's impossible otherwise. And so there's a paradox there, right? We stay so far away from chametz, and the only way to bake matzah is to play with fire, so to speak. Maybe matzah should be made out of rice, which can't possibly become chametz no matter what. But rice is, if you make matzah out of rice, it'd be possible. And clearly there's something symbolic about that. What's the difference, after all, between chametz and matzah? Chametz is what happens when you mix flour with water, and then you just let nature take its course. You just mix the flour and the water, and you knead it into dough, and you walk away. And chametz is what happens automatically. Matzah is what happens when a person takes control of the situation and says, I'm not going to let that become chametz. I'm going to control what happens. And again, I don't think this is pshat, but I think midrashically we can say that those are 2 different ways that people live their lives. Tragically, too many human beings live their lives like chametz. Just pulled along by life, however life takes me. They, talk to the kids. What do the Israeli? What do our children say? Arachon Nizrom, right? Where are you going? Nizrom. We'll just get washed along and wherever we wind up. And that might be a fun way to spend the weekend, but tragically, too many people spend their lives that way. That's one way to spend your life. The other way to spend your life is chametz, is matzah. I'm sorry to say, I'm going to take control. I'm going to determine the outcome. If you look at those 2 ideas together, the Korban Pesach, the courage that's necessary at times to reject certain aspects, at least, of things that everyone takes for granted, because that's what everyone does, and that's the groupthink, and that's the way society operates. And at times you have to literally slaughter the false gods that we all worship. And the idea of matzah, the way I just explained it, that it involves taking control of the situation and leading a life where I don't let the forces around me push me along, but rather I take control and I try to determine the outcome of things. So you put those, we'll get to the third idea in a second, but you put those two things together and there's a lifestyle there. I mentioned at the outset, we're not supposed to say haspedim, but I'll just mention one story. Dafka, not from our childhood, not from when I was growing up with Debbie, but after we both got married. My wife, Monica, reminded me of this story that she mentioned to us. At one point when Debbie was newly married, she had a job in Manhattan. And it was Purim. And here in Israel we all get off on Purim, or we can, I assume almost all of us can take off without a problem. But in Chutz La'aretz it's not so simple. And I don't know, for whatever reason she felt she had to go to work that day. And there's obviously no halakhic problem going to work on Purim. So she went to hear the Megillah in the morning or something, and she was going to go to work. And you hear the Megillah in the morning, you can take care of your Mishloach Manot or Matanot if you're in. And Sudat Purim, people go to work. Sometimes just, maybe they go out to a restaurant or something and take a lunch break and have a Sudat Purim. And that's what she and one or two other religious people in her office were planning to do. And then, if I understand correctly, it was Debbie's idea. She hung up a sign in the office. We're having a Sudat Purim for lunch. Anyone wants to join us, contact us. And she what?
They ordered from a restaurant.
They ordered into the office from a restaurant. And she told us that not only was she amazed at the number of people that answered that call and joined in for the Sudat Purim, some of the people that joined her for Sudat Purim were people that she didn't even know was Jewish. And I just thought of that.
They
And
walked in and
put on a kippah on their head and said that, what a Kiddush Hashem. And then they went back to work afterwards. But that's just a very small but highly significant example of living life, not just taking the path of least resistance. And not rejecting everything either, right? There are those who feel that in order to slaughter the foreign gods, we have to lock ourselves up in self-contained social ghettos that we create for ourselves and put very high walls around ourselves. And that's one philosophy. I don't think any of our philosophy, and that wasn't Debbie's philosophy. Debbie's philosophy was living in the world. And at the same time, when you need to go against the flow, when you need to take control, to do so. So that's Pesach and Matzah. And then, of course, we have Maror. And Maror symbolizes the fact that sometimes life has bitterness in it. And at an event like this, we don't need to elaborate on the aspect of Maror in our lives. But I'll just close with one idea on that score. Rabbi Gamliel says we have to mention all three of these mitzvot. And all three of these mitzvot have to be fulfilled, at least in theory. Hopefully we'll be able to eat the Korban Pesach and the Matzah and the Maror. There's two ways to fulfill that mitzvah. And we acknowledge both ways in the Seder. First we eat the Matzah and the Maror separately, and then Korech, Zeicher Mikdash Kehillah. Hillel's opinion was that you have to eat the Pesach and the Matzah and the Maror all together, all at the same time. Matzah used to be like a lafa, right? So if you think about it, basically it was a shawarma, basically, right? Matzah, roasted lamb, and charif. Oh, not charif, and then maror. That's the way Hillel ate it. And according to Hillel, that's the only way to eat it. Because you have to, lefi Hillel, you have to korech, pesach, matzah, maror, biyachad, and eat them together. And perhaps, again, homiletically, we can suggest that that's the way to mess it up. The way to deal with the maror of life is to wrap it up together with the pesach and the matzah. None of us have any control of what's going to happen, but we do have control of our own reactions. And, the ability to make those decisions, those difficult decisions, and to face the challenges that are represented by Pesach and Matzah, wrapped up together with Maror, that's really the secret of redemption. So perhaps this is an idea that we can maybe think about that a little bit for a moment at the Seder, and try to draw strength from this idea. And with this, to be zocher to the geula that comes from the combination of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. For the camera.
Actually, if you can
Wrap it.
Okay, I'll just Rabbi Yaakov Beasley, husband of Dvorah Beasley.
Although Todd wants to be called Joe.
Joel.
John was a typical
I
Joe.
wasn't sure, but I figured
No,
I'd
no, no.
But they lived, of course,
That was
from
the
each
conversation
other.
we had with him. He goes, you know, I know my son's going to be learning, you know, calling you Yaakov, but can I still call you Joe?
But they lived across from home from each other,
Yeah,
Teaneck,
they're
right?
neighbors of Tad and Debbie from Teaneck and remain very much in touch.
I'll add a little more because Debbie and my wife, Debbie, went to Israel together twice.
Oh,
Once,
and so did Rachel, actually.
so did Rachel.
We went to Israel twice with her.
Twice in Nurim, once a high school program lasted for what, 1 year?
Yeah.
Before,
Basically.
it lasted 1 year in
In
Nurim in
It
their
was-
high school years, and then in a road. So, and this being, Debbie being in a road girl, I thought I'd begin and end with Rav Kook and throw in some ideas from Halach Mani in the middle. And like Rabbi Haber said, you can't say it has spit, but hopefully the idea is, I'll make them a split, but if they'll tie into the person Debbie was. And of course, I saw Debbie last year when I went speaking in the States. She was kind enough to open her house, which made it very appropriate that we should start with Halach Mania, which is our invitation to guests. This is how we start our Magid. We don't, Rav Kook, and I'll start with this, it says, you get a real sense of a person, on their day off. I don't think Rav Kook had days off, I don't think he did, or vacation days, but you have a sense, you go to work, you do your responsibilities. The first day, now you got your day off, what's the first thing you do? When you're suddenly given that freedom, what's the first thing that you do?
Sleep break.
And for many, it's sleep late, and for some people, it's get up and run a 10K this morning, whatever they were doing. That wasn't me. It was, I did get up to run, didn't run, but got up to run. And it's that, what do you do with freedom? And that really reveals something with the essential person. And Rav Kook says that's why we have to start Haggadah with Halach Mania. Because the first thing that we do is we show that we're B'nai Abraham, B'nai Chesed. The first thing that we do, even before we start anything else, we're free, quickly, find somebody to invite, find somebody who needs help. Do an act of Chesed. Because that's who we are inside. We are inside, once we're given, once that day off is there, there's times we have to manage with the world. What the world gives us is, Alan says correctly, you're stuck at work on Purim, what do you do? This time, what do you do on the Sunday? They do have Sundays in the States still, right? What do you do with that moment of freedom? And that's what Pesach gives Halach Mani, says Rav Kook. Rav Soloveitchik then asks a very interesting question. He says, that's wonderful. This is a wonderful act of chesed. But if you think about it, Halach Mani is in the wrong place. Halach Mani should be put before Kiddush. We're having 3 more glasses of wine. Are we really so cheap we need to save the 4th glass? I'll invite him late because I've really got to cut down a few. I don't have enough karpas for everybody. But there's plenty of matzah to go around. It really doesn't make sense. Why do we do, halach ma'anya there? Do halach ma'anya at the beginning. At the beginning of the Seder, which is if the purpose was to invite guests. And so, Rav Soloveitchik says something very interesting. He says, it may be that this is not in fact an invitation. Of course we should be inviting, and of course we're doing the acts of chesed. But the first thing we're doing is perhaps the greatest act of freedom that we have. How so? One of the definitions of a person who's an Eved in Halakha is if he finds something on the floor, it's not his. It belongs to the person who he works for, who he's his owner, his Baal. There's no such thing as private property. An Eved not only has no control over time, has no control over physical possessions. And what are we doing? We're taking this small piece of bread, and it's not even bread, and nowadays we're barely at lava stage. If we're lucky, you get it like 2 centimeters, 2 degrees and it cracks. But we have this very small piece. But despite it, one would think, it's very easy for a guy who's got 1,000, like the way he describes Shlomo Melech's meals, someone went to, he loves Hashem so much, he gave 1,000 korbanot, and he gave this and everything. When you're as rich as Shlomo Melech, then you can be very generous with what you have. But real freedom is to be able to say, it doesn't matter how much I have. This is mine. And I'm choosing to share it. And that's a tremendous act of freedom in and of itself. And both, I think, Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik are really touching upon the same thing, which is freedom is the ability to give. And freedom is the ability to give to others. And it's the ability not to look and make cheshbonos. Can I give? Can't I give? Do I give? Don't I give? But just, this is who I am. I want to give. I want to be able to give. And it's, first, my wife said, I'm trying to think of that one story. And she goes, I'm trying to think of that one story that would personify that. Couldn't do it. Because there's so many just small acts of kindness. Sometimes it's not that one story that personifies the person, but it's that build-up of a small word of kindness, act of kindness, one act of chesed here, one smile, one, phone call, one email, all these small little things, because they're really what add up to make a man. Okay? I always tell my students this Schindler's paradox, because the paradox, if members have read the book, it's fascinating. A guy who was a bum and a philanderer and a womanizer before and was not successful, and after the war did nothing of great notice, but he did one great act of chesed. Beforehand he didn't. Never continued before, never continued afterwards. And in some respects it makes him heroic. But on the other hand, we have who? We don't look at Schindler's as our role models. We look at the Alpha believers, who invite everybody when they don't ask questions. And again and again and again. The Torah tells us one story because that's what Abraham did his entire life. Every small act of chesed, that's what made him Avraham Avinu. And he kept doing these small little things until they grew and they grew, and made him the Ish Chesed, the personification of chesed. And in that respect, that's what Debbie was to so many of us, because just a small act of kindness she did. The second's a little bit more interesting. I found it in the Rav Soloveitchik, in the Berman edition. There's, I think, 6 different Soloveitchik Haggadahs now. Now, everybody who was in this Rav Shir felt the need to publish a Haggadah, which is interesting. And King Yerbu, it says, Kol yichvin yetev v'yechol, kol yitzrik yetev v'yifsach. Anybody who is hungry, let him come and eat. Anybody who needs, let him come and do the Pesach, Yifsach. And the question is, it seems a little repetitious. If you're hungry, come and eat. And what is the person who needs? And Rav Soloveitchik is a fascinating answer. Probably only the man who wrote Lonely Man of Faith and dealt with all the existential questions that, bothered him and sometimes bother us, could come up with this. There's 2 types of people in need. There are people who are physically hungry. They're really, they're starving. And for them, let them come, feed them. That's the morals, the prophets, the right thing to do. That's what you do. But there's another person in need. A person who has, the Rav writes, a person who has $1 million. But he's going to share his Korban Pesach. And that's a separate type of need. The loneliness, the inability to be with other people. Somebody who does not have that, doesn't have that human connection with other people. May make the best salary in the world, may have the most fancy wine at the Seder. What good is all of it if there's nobody there to share it with? All those who need, let them come and be part of our Korban Pesach. Because the whole point of Korban Pesach is it's not meant to be eaten alone. It's not a mitzvah on the individual, it's a mitzvah on the family, on the chaburah, the immediate family, the nuclear family, but also the larger friends who joined together. It wasn't just a shwarm, it was a shwarm among friends. It was a group of people, and it cannot be done alone. And the ability to connect to other people is what Chalach Maran reminds us of. And just, Debbie had that, the ability to really connect in a very warm, strong, personal way to everybody. That you just felt that you could talk to her about anything, and you could be there, and she'd be there, no matter, you always thought she'd be there. And that's what makes this, without saying that, it's so hard, because she had that ability, not just to find people who were yichvin, but also ditzur, those who needed it on all levels. And she was there, always there. And the third one, I come back to Rav Kook, and then put my little spin at the end, with your permission, Rav Kook will not say I'm going to finish it, but Rav Kook asked a simple question. He says, this is written in Aramaic. Hadalach mahalach ma'anya da'achlu abatana. It's not the way, it's Aramaic. When was it added? And what does it come to teach us? So I'll say it very quickly, because I know we're at the time where kids start to get out and people have to run. This isn't Bavel, but what time after of Bavel? Most of the Haggadah was written in the time of Eretz Yisrael. It's in Hebrew. It's Tanayim are mentioned. It's not an Amora. At best, it's a Rav and Shmuel argument afterwards about where the actual Haggadah is, but that's not. They're not in the. There, the Haggadah was clearly written in Eretz Yisrael. So this had to be put in from Bavel. He says, and he says, what does this come to say? He says, can you imagine the Jews living in Bavel after Churban Bayit? Exile again. The Beit Mikdash destroyed again. In Galut again. Does this never end? Is this just an endless cycle of, we have a couple good years and then we blow it. And then we're out again. And then maybe we wait 50, 70 years. 2000. Nobody knows. But is this an endless cycle? The Haggadah comes to tell us at the most that if you're asking, do we need to go through this process again? He says, of course we do. Because look at what Kadosh Baruch Hu did. If you think that we're trapped, understand there was another group of people who once felt very trapped too, and that refers to the Jews in Egypt. And their situation was much more dire even than what you can imagine your situation is nowadays. Halach manya we called out. And yet we still continue to say it. Because we remind ourselves, Kadosh Baruch Hu was there for us then. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu will be here for us now. And therefore we end Halach manya with, we will eat it in Jerusalem. We begin with Emunah. We begin with the faith that things will always be better. When I sat with Debbie last spring, it was a Shabbat afternoon, I was there in New York for 3 days just to speak. And I said, Debbie, you look happy. She goes, I know. But I should be in Eretz Yisrael. I should be in Eretz Yisrael. She never lost that. She never lost the essential sense of, where she should be, Or I said at the beginning she was an Order girl, and I'm ending with the idea that she's an Order girl. Right, this was she was just a sense that she had this connection to Eretz Yisrael, to the larger picture of Jewish history, where we should be, in historical terms, this is where Jews are supposed to be now. This is what God wants. This is where we sacrifice to be. I'll finish with a thought, and I'm going to come back to Pesach Matzah tomorrow. It's interesting. We start out with Halach manya. This is the bread of friction. But the next time we talk about matzah, this is the bread that we. You know why we eat this? It's not because we suffer. No, this is a sign of freedom. This is what our fathers took out and our mother, because they didn't know they were leaving. All of a sudden, they're ready. As soon as they're ready to leave, they're ready to leave. Remember, it's important to know that the Jews, when they ate the Korban Pesach in Egypt, had no idea they were leaving the next day. They knew there was a Makkah coming. But Moshe never tells them that they're actually leaving the next day. Proof? 3 million, 6 million Jewish women cooking the next day. Oh, we're leaving now? If they had known beforehand, do you think they would be sitting up and baking bread? No, we're leaving now, despite everything. And they get up and they leave, and it's a sign of freedom. And it's interesting, I think, that the Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, all three of those symbols began as symbols of oppression and only of difficulty. But they suddenly turned into symbols of freedom. At that point in time, you can feel the difficulty and the suffering and the avdus, but then there's this shift at Pesach Matzah where all of a sudden we don't talk with it anymore. Then we suddenly become free. And one of the tricks I think that Haggadah is teaching is the way to achieve that freedom is to be able to take a hold of the difficult times that you've had and reframe them. It's a fancy word, okay? To be able to look at something that happened, hey, I understand it differently now. I understand that the matzah that used to symbolize the poor meager rations of a slave suddenly becomes a symbol of freedom. I understand that the Korban Pesach, which symbolizes this death and destruction all around, it suddenly becomes the celebration of our deliverance. And even the Maror, and I found this in the text, says, why do we mention the Maror here? Because we have to eat. But we have to appreciate even those difficult times we go through, when we have difficult times, actually led to the Gula being faster. Okay, the famous drasha that was 210 years and not 400 years, we didn't know why we're getting out now. The Maror symbolized what seemed to be very bitter was actually the key for us leaving faster. There's something that we're able to, if at that moment in time we can look and say, look back at what happened and say, something very, very hard happened, something very difficult, went through a very difficult experience. But that moment, we're looking and say, you know something? I see how that helped us get to Gula faster. It has the meaning. I can't explain it, I can't justify it, but I can try to understand it as meaning. And I have emunah that it has meaning. And, you know, if Todd and the boys were here, we give them a big hug to the best of our ability. And hopefully that message goes to them. Because these, you know, to have this happen, you know, very sad, but we are going into Pesach, hopefully we'll be able to get them, you know, not just as a seder, we should always look at everything, find the ability to find meaning, and that Debbie's memory should be a blessing, okay, and only bring smiles to the faces and happiness to the faces, and that, you know, we should celebrate together, Shna Haba, Yerushalayim, B'niyah.